I never thought betrayal could come from the two people I trusted most, until it did. It's strange how peace can disguise itself as routine. Most evenings, my life played out like clockwork. The sound of my girlfriend's keys on the counter, the faint smell of her shampoo drifting down the hallway, the soft hum of the TV filling the silence between us. It wasn't exciting, but it was ours. I thought that meant something. Across the street lived Claire, early 40s, calm, self-assured. She had that kind of presence that made everything around her feel steadier. She'd wave whenever I walked my dog, sometimes stop to ask about my week. Nothing more than polite, neighborly kindness. At least, that's what I believed back then. I used to joke that she seemed too put together to belong on our street of half-finished lawns and crooked mailboxes. She always laughed softly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, saying, "It's all an illusion, trust me." Looking back, maybe that was the first warning I missed, that illusions have a way of hiding right in front of us. The thing about change is, it never happens all at once. It seeps in quietly, a shift in tone, a delayed reply, the way someone avoids meeting your eyes. I didn't notice it at first, not really. But I felt it. My girlfriend started coming home later. The warmth in her voice had thinned into something polite, almost distant. When I'd ask how her day was, she'd give me short, clipped answers, followed by that hollow smile that told me she didn't want to talk. And then there were the small things. The scent of cologne on her jacket that wasn't mine. A new playlist she kept replaying, one I'd never heard before. And the way her laughter sounded different when she texted someone else. But denial is comforting when you're not ready for the truth. I told myself it was stress, work, exhaustion, anything but what my gut already knew. Then one evening, as the sky turned amber and the neighborhood sank into its usual quiet, I caught sight of her standing outside, across the street, at Claire's door. She wasn't knocking. She was already inside. The image stuck with me longer than I wanted to admit. My girlfriend, at Claire's house, long after dinner. Two women who barely spoke before, now suddenly close. It didn't make sense, and yet it made too much sense. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt amplified, the ticking clock, the wind brushing against the window, the faint laughter echoing from across the street. I wanted to ignore it. Pretend I hadn't seen anything. But something deep inside whispered that the story of my life was quietly shifting, that I was about to lose something I still believed was mine. I didn't know it then, but that was the night the fracture began. Not a break, not yet. Just a silent crack in the foundation, the kind that starts beneath your feet before you ever hear it split. And in that stillness, with the streetlights painting gold across the pavement, I realized, sometimes betrayal doesn't come with a shout, it comes wrapped in familiarity. Smiling from across the street. It was raining the night the truth came for me. Not the kind of rain that thunders or floods, but the kind that lingers, soft and patient, as if the sky itself was reluctant to let go. The sound of it against the window felt like a rhythm I couldn't escape, steady, quiet, almost forgiving. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone out of habit, not expectation. That's when I saw it, a name lighting up on her screen. A name that shouldn't have been there so late at night. My best friend. At first, it didn't register. Just two people chatting. Harmless. But curiosity has a way of pulling you down slowly, until you can't stop looking. I opened the thread. The messages weren't explicit, no grand declarations, no guilty confessions. Just familiarity. The kind that hurts more than any word could. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. Late-night replies that came faster than mine ever did. And then one line that stole the air from my lungs. "I wish you were here instead." It's strange how a single sentence can make an entire room feel smaller. I just sat there, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, the rain outside growing louder. My hands trembled, but my mind stayed perfectly still, as if it refused to believe what my eyes had seen. I didn't confront her. Not that night. Instead, I walked outside barefoot, letting the rain soak through my shirt. The cold grounded me, a reminder that I was still real, even if everything else suddenly wasn't. That's when I noticed her, Claire, sitting on her porch across the street, her figure lit faintly by the porch light. She was wrapped in a soft sweater, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. Her eyes lifted when she saw me, and for a moment the storm didn't matter. "You're out late," she said, her voice low, carried gently by the rain. I forced a small smile. "Couldn't sleep." She studied me for a second, really looked. Not the way people look when they're curious, but when they already know something's wrong. Then she nodded, her gaze softening. "Sometimes sleep isn't what we need. Sometimes we just need to feel the rain for a while." I don't know why that sentence hit me so hard. Maybe because it sounded like understanding, not pity, not advice. Just understanding. I didn't tell her what I'd seen, but I think she sensed it anyway. There was a heaviness in her eyes, the kind that comes from having lived through her own share of quiet heartbreaks. We didn't speak much after that. I stood at the edge of my driveway, and she sat quietly across the street, both of us surrounded by the sound of falling rain, two people lost in different versions of the same pain. When I finally went back inside, the house felt foreign. Her things were still there, her coat, her perfume, her laughter echoing faintly in memory, but everything warm about it had vanished. That night, I learned something I'd never wanted to know. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come crashing in like a storm. Sometimes it drifts in slowly, word by word, message by message, until one day, you realize it's been raining inside your heart for far too long. The days that followed blurred together, quiet mornings, sleepless nights, and a silence that seemed to hum through every corner of the house. Heartbreak isn't loud, it's the sound of an empty mug clinking against the sink, the weight of a phone you stopped checking, the echo of footsteps where laughter used to live. I didn't see my ex again after that night. She packed her things while I was at work, leaving behind nothing but an apology note that felt rehearsed. But strangely, what hurt more wasn't her absence, it was realizing how easily she'd been able to leave. And then there was Claire. At first, I tried to avoid her. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone, especially not the woman whose porch light had witnessed my lowest moment. But grief has a way of dulling pride. One afternoon, I opened my door and found a small plate covered in foil on the step, still warm. A note beside it read, "You don't have to eat it, but it's better than nothing." See, I smiled for the first time in days. That evening, I walked across the street. She was in her garden, trimming the edges of her lavender plants, the soft light of sunset spilling over her shoulders. I thanked her, awkwardly, and she just nodded with that calm, unbothered grace she always carried. "Sit for a minute," she said, motioning toward the porch. "You look like you haven't rested in weeks." Inside her kitchen, everything smelled of citrus and vanilla. The room felt lived in, open books, a half-finished crossword, the kind of quiet that feels like safety. She handed me a cup of chamomile tea, her fingers brushing mine for just a second. The touch was nothing, or maybe it was everything. We talked, but not about what happened. Instead, we spoke of smaller things, music, the weather, the ridiculous cost of rent. I could feel her watching me between sentences, measuring the spaces where I hesitated. After a while, she said softly, "You remind me of someone I used to be." I looked up, unsure how to respond. She smiled, eyes distant. "When my marriage ended, I kept pretending I was fine. Everyone told me to move on, so I tried. But pretending doesn't heal anything. It just teaches you to hide better." Her words landed gently, like raindrops on still water. I didn't realize until later that I'd been holding my breath. She reached for her cup, and for a fleeting moment, her hand brushed against mine again. Neither of us moved. It wasn't flirtation. It was recognition, two people standing in the same emotional ruin, realizing they weren't completely alone there. When I left that night, the air outside felt different, lighter, but not yet free. She stood by the door, one hand resting on the frame, the other clutching her tea. "Come by any time," she said. "Talking helps, even when you think it won't." As I crossed the street back to my house, I realized something I hadn't felt in weeks: comfort. Not the kind that fixes you, the kind that simply says you're still here. And maybe, for now, that was enough. I started spending more time at Claire's house, not intentionally, at least not at first. It began with small visits, returning her dish, dropping by with coffee, helping her carry in groceries. But over time, it became something else entirely, a quiet rhythm between us that neither of us named. Her home was different from mine. It didn't just look lived in, it felt lived in. Books stacked on the end table, soft music always humming somewhere in the background, the faint scent of bergamot, and something floral lingering in the air. It was the kind of place that reminded you of warmth, not the loud kind, but the steady, lasting kind. Most evenings, we'd sit in her backyard when the sun began to dip, the sky fading into watercolor shades of peach and blue. She'd pour us both tea, and we'd talk about nothing, and somehow, those conversations meant everything. Sometimes she'd share stories from her past, not all at once, but in fragments. A laugh about a trip she once took alone to Italy. A sigh when she mentioned her ex-husband, who had stopped loving her long before he left. She spoke without bitterness, just quiet understanding. I listened, not out of pity, but fascination. There was something magnetic about the way she carried her past, not as a burden, but as proof she'd survived it. And then there were the silences, long, comfortable ones that stretched between us like a shared language. I never felt the need to fill them. She'd sit across from me, her eyes reflecting the fading light, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. Sometimes she'd look up, catch me staring, and smile, not a flirtatious smile, but one that said, "I see you too." One night, as crickets began their song and the air cooled, she asked quietly, "Do you ever worry about what people might say?" I frowned. "About what?" "About this," she said, gesturing between us. "You, me, sitting here so often. Talking the way we do." I paused before answering. "Let them talk. They don't know what this is." She tilted her head, eyes soft. "And what is this, Eli?" The truth hovered between us, fragile and dangerous. I swallowed hard. "I don't know. But it feels honest." She smiled then, a slow, sad smile that said she both wanted to believe me and was terrified to. "You're young," she whispered. "You're supposed to be chasing things, not slowing down for someone like me." Her words hung heavy in the air. I leaned forward slightly, enough for her to feel the sincerity in my voice. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe I'm tired of chasing things that never last." She didn't reply. Instead, she looked away, her expression unreadable, her hands folding in her lap. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was charged, alive, pulsing with something unspoken. The porch light flickered on, casting her face in a soft, golden glow. I noticed then how time had touched her, faint lines near her eyes, silver glints in her hair, and yet she never looked more beautiful. That night, I realized that connection isn't always loud or certain. Sometimes, it's two people sitting side by side in the quiet, both pretending they're not falling for something they can't yet define. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of day that starts with sunshine and ends in quiet wreckage. I'd gone to Claire's to help her fix a leaky faucet. She was in her usual weekend rhythm, hair tied loosely, sleeves rolled up, humming an old song I didn't recognize. The air smelled faintly of lemon soap and coffee. There was something easy about being there now. Familiar. I knew where she kept her tools, how she liked her tea, the way she'd hum when she was thinking. We didn't need to say much. The silence between us had grown comfortable, even protective. But comfort is fragile when the past still lingers. I was tightening the last screw when a car pulled into my driveway. Through the open window, I saw her, my ex, stepping out, her posture sharp, her expression unreadable. I froze. Claire noticed instantly. "You don't have to go," she said gently. I hesitated. "I should. She'll just keep knocking." Claire nodded, her face composed, but her fingers gripped the edge of the counter. I could tell this wasn't just about my ex, it was about what it might look like. About the whispers already forming before a word had been said. When I walked outside, the air felt heavier. My ex stood by the car door, arms folded. "So this is where you've been," she said. No greeting. No warmth. I didn't answer. She looked past me, her eyes landing on the open doorway of Claire's house. "Of course," she said with a bitter laugh. "I should have known." "Known what?" I asked quietly. "That you'd run to her. You always liked her attention, didn't you? The way she made you feel special. Don't act surprised, people talk." Her words were sharp, meant to cut. I didn't raise my voice. "You don't get to rewrite this," I said. "You were the one who left." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "I left because you were already halfway gone." And then silence. The kind that leaves no room to breathe. I didn't know what to say, because maybe, in some way, she was right. When she finally left, the sound of her car fading down the street felt like an ending I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. I turned back toward Claire's house. She was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes glassy but steady. For the first time, she looked small. Vulnerable. "I'm sorry," I said, stepping closer. She shook her head. "You don't owe me an apology. But I don't want to be the reason someone thinks less of you." I stepped closer again, closing the space between us. "You're not the reason, Claire. You're the reminder that I still have something real left in me." Her breath trembled slightly, but she didn't pull away when I reached for her hand. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was human. The simple act of saying, "I'm here. You don't have to face this alone." She squeezed my hand back, just once, before letting go. The sky above us began to darken, a storm rolling in. And maybe it was fitting. Because that day, the world outside stopped pretending, and so did we. The storm passed, but its echo lingered. After that day, something between Claire and me changed, not in words, but in the way silence started to mean more. I found myself at her house more often, not out of habit but because being there felt right. Her world was calm, and I needed that calm-like air. She'd make dinner, simple meals, nothing fancy, and we'd eat side by side at her small kitchen table, sometimes talking, sometimes not. It was strange how our quiet had become a kind of language. Every movement, every pause said something we didn't dare name. That evening, the rain returned, softer this time, tracing slow lines down her window. We were sitting on her couch, a movie playing quietly in the background. The screen flickered light across the room, glinting in her hair. She sat close enough that I could feel her warmth, smelled the faint citrus of her shampoo. At first, we made small talk, about work, the film, the kind of pointless chatter people use to avoid the things that matter. But the pauses between our words kept stretching longer. The air felt heavier, charged with something we both recognized but couldn't touch. She shifted slightly, turning toward me. Her eyes met mine, steady, unguarded. "Eli," she said softly, almost like she was afraid of breaking something fragile. "You should be out with people your age. Traveling, making mistakes, figuring out who you are." I smiled faintly. "Maybe this is me figuring that out." Her brow furrowed. "By sitting here with me?" I nodded. "By being somewhere that finally feels honest." For a moment, she said nothing. Her eyes searched mine, not for reassurance, but for truth. Then she sighed, looking down. "You don't know what you're saying." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I do. Maybe too well." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You don't understand how the world works. People see what they want to see, and they'll make this into something ugly." I hesitated, then reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. My fingertips grazed her temple, lingering just long enough to make her breath hitch. "Let them talk," I whispered. Her eyes fluttered closed for half a second, long enough for me to feel her leaning into the touch before she pulled back. "Don't," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "Don't make this harder." I pulled my hand away, nodding slowly. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "You didn't do anything wrong. You just don't see where this leads." The room fell silent again. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, like the sky was reminding us of its warning. We sat there, close enough to feel each other's presence, far enough to pretend it didn't mean anything. After a while, she reached for my hand, just for a moment, then let go. Her fingers were warm, trembling slightly. "Promise me something," she said. "Don't let this be the thing that keeps you from living." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could promise that. Because living, to me, had already started to mean being near her. That night, when I left, the air outside smelled of rain and lavender. I looked back once. She was still standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes soft. We hadn't crossed the line. But maybe, in every way that mattered, we already had. Time moved differently after that night. Days blurred into weeks, and though nothing was ever said, everything had changed. We saw each other less often, not out of anger or avoidance, but because we both understood that our connection had reached a point where silence said more than words ever could. Claire went back to her routines, tending her garden, teaching her weekend art class, walking her dog at the same hour each morning. From my window, I'd still catch glimpses of her sometimes, sunlight brushing her hair, a soft smile breaking across her face when a neighbor stopped to talk. She looked peaceful. Maybe she had found her balance again. Maybe we both had. I'd started to rebuild my own life, piece by piece. New job, new place. I told myself I was moving on, but the truth was simpler. I was learning to carry her instead of chasing her. Before I moved, I decided to see her one last time. It was late afternoon, the sky heavy with that kind of gold light that makes everything look like memory. She opened the door before I even knocked, as if she'd been expecting me. "Hey," I said softly. She smiled, that same calm, knowing smile. "You're leaving?" I nodded. "Tomorrow morning." For a moment, she didn't move. Then she stepped aside. "Come in. The kettle's already on." Inside, everything felt the same, the faint hum of music from the radio, the smell of lemon and tea. It was strange how a place could hold so much warmth even when your heart felt like it was packing itself away. We sat at the table, the same one where I'd first told her I didn't know what we were. The silence between us wasn't tense this time. It was full, gentle, like the world had stopped rushing. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "You've been through a lot, and you didn't let it turn you bitter." I smiled, though it ached. "You helped with that." She looked down at her hands, tracing the edge of her teacup. "You helped me too, you know. More than you realize." There was a pause. Long enough for the sound of the clock to fill the space. Then, softly, I said, "I don't know how to say goodbye." She looked up, her eyes glistening. "Then don't. Just promise me you'll keep choosing the kind of peace you found here." I nodded, swallowing the weight in my throat. When I stood to leave, she walked me to the door. The late sun framed her in amber light, and for a second, it felt like time itself was holding its breath. Without thinking, I leaned forward and kissed her cheek, a slow, quiet kiss that said everything words couldn't. Her hand brushed my arm as I pulled back, and for a heartbeat, either of us moved. "Take care of yourself, Eli," she whispered. "You too, Claire." And then I left. As I walked down the street, the evening air felt cool against my skin. I didn't look back right away. When I finally did, she was still standing there, a silhouette in the doorway, small but steady, framed by light. Maybe some people aren't meant to stay forever. Maybe they just arrive to show you what love can look like when it's quiet, patient, and real. And sometimes, that's enough.